Hey everybody, Wrenching with Bob. Bob here, going to take the front wheel off of the BMW F850GS and we'll put it back on as part of the process as well, and hopefully this helps a few people out. Bike's on the center stand, and as the front wheel comes off, right, the bike may want to tip one way or the other, right? It may want to tip forward, which would wind up being a bit of trouble. And in fact, it could be a whole lot of trouble. If you look at the way that the center stand is working, if the bike tips forward, the weight on the bike is going to suddenly have this guy basically fold up, right? And that would be that'd be a pretty big disaster, especially if it was happening right next to you. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a strap here. We're going to put a strap to something solid like here on the crash bar to the center stand to make sure that this triangle stays nice and tensioned. That way, if the weight does shift forward, we've at least got a strap that's holding this guy from folding up. And if it were to fold up, it would fold up slowly and give you a chance to get away from the bike or to correct it if it were to happen. So the bottom one is seems to be a nice place to put that. And then here to the crash bars. Give a good tug, right? And there we have it. At a nice elbow, nice crook here, and there's not a ton of force going on here, but it's taut. It's got good teeth for holding it together. And then down at the bottom, got the this guy up underneath the edge of that. So if it did try to go forward, at least it's got a chance to hold it, and hopefully that'll be safe. Safety third. I mean first. The mud guard on the 850, the fender guard here, has to be taken off in order to really get to the forks, to operate on them at all. To take off the dust seal, there's a dust seal here, and the seal's inside here on the upside down fork. And this guy's totally in the way. So as part of my early investigation, I had already taken that off, and so I've kind of stuffed it back in here. It's not really attached, but I wanted to show it for completeness sake that this guy is going to have to be taken off, and it does take a little bit of wrestling to do. I think BMW probably has a more complete method for doing this that probably maybe even remove some of these lines, because it's a little tight doing it. But basically, there's six Torx bolts that go in a variety of places. I'll point them out, but like I said, I've just stuffed this in here. So here's the spots, 1 and 2 here and here, and then back here there's this black piece here that would be here, right? So there's the third one, and same thing on the other side. You know, there's like a plug. There's a plug here. This guy goes into the side of the fender. So that's got to come out to give you a little room and access. This guy here is pinned inside of this guy here, so you got to pull that out. And then you kind of have to finagle, especially this ear right here. This ear becomes a little difficult to get out and around and up through, but that's the goal, is to then get yourself in a position where you can then, pushing on those ears a little bit, it's flexible, so it will do the job, and then that whole piece comes out. So now we have access to the dust seals and the seals and the fork itself, with the exception of up underneath here, so that'll come next. But that's the removal of the fender. So one thing I missed on the fender removal is that those 6 Torx bolts, these are T30s, 1, 2, and 3. Alright, so I'm still preparing for taking the front wheel off. One of the the tricks here is once the front wheel's gone, right, the bike isn't going to sit right because it's only got one wheel. So it's sitting on the stand, and as I mentioned before, I put in the strap to make sure that the stand doesn't fold up easily. And really the best way to do this is really support the entire bike on a jack. And I do have a jack that can do that, but it's actually going to sit here for probably a week or more as I get through this process and order some springs and things like that. So what I've decided to try is I'm going to use this little chair from my childhood that I'm going to put underneath the bash plate. It's up under the edge of the bash plate all the way across pretty much. I think that should hold it. Quick tour of the front wheel. What we have is we have 12mm hex that goes into here, into the axle. And this is the primary piece that's going to that you're going to unscrew. And then the other secondary piece we have here is these two T40 Torx bolts that are pinching the axle, right? So this is what actually keeps the axle from ever coming loose. And on the other side there are the same two T40 Torx bolts on this side too, and then there's an enormous hex bolt in here, and there's no need to have that tool. It's really just going to slide out. So what you're going to do is once this side is unscrewed, right, we'll wind up tapping it out the other side. And so the trick here is don't loosen the pinch bolts on the big side, but loosen them on the side that you're going to unscrew. Right, this way this guy is happy to unscrew for the axle, while the pinch bolts on the other side hold this one in place. Loosen the T40s. And they don't really need to be taken out, they just need to be loosened so that they're just wiggling. Do this guy. So there's that. So now we'll do the other side. We'll undo the pinch bolts. Through the power of editing, I'm going to do this in the right order, but I didn't do this in the right order. So learn from my mistake. So the caliper here is a T50 Torx, and the caliper does have to come off in order to let the wheel be free. The bolts that hold on the caliper, which must be removed in order to get the wheel out, they are T50s. So I've got a T50 here, and I'm going to break those free and then take the caliper off, and then I'm going to hang it on a bungee. And the purpose of this is you don't want these lines to wind up stressed, and these banjo bolts and things, these you don't want to be stressed. This is an important part of your ability to live, is the ability to stop. So don't do brakes the wrong way. Should be able to do this with my fingers at this point. And I can. So there's that guy. And I'm supporting the caliper with my right hand here so that it doesn't drop unceremoniously. And there's a little clip here that's hanging on the ABS cable that's holding that thing in place. We can just let that be. That's not a problem. And I'm going to see if I can find a good way to support this, probably through the hole that the bolt was in. So that holds that whole assembly nicely up there to the crash bar. Two points of note. So BMW actually calls for this piece to be removed. This slotted ring is is the ABS system. And so this is the ABS sensor right here. And so they say take that off. And I'm going to try and do this without taking that off. And I suppose that they're just trying to make sure you don't damage the sensor and don't bang it up either on the way out or the way in. The other point of note, the brakes, right, the brake pads are inside of those calipers, and one of the things you want to make sure that you don't do while the wheel is off, and this kind of goes for any brake job, is don't pull on your brake lever. Right, if you pull on that brake lever, you're going to have the pistons come further out, and it'll be more difficult to put the whole thing back together because you're going to have to spread those pads, and that sometimes can be a pain in the butt. I'm going to take a hammer and I'm going to place this back in place, and you could screw it in a thread or two if you want in order to get your fingers out of the way. And this should not take any real force. This is a light operation. So tap, 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 right? And there you go. So now I've actually pushed the axle through a little bit just by barely tapping on that bolt. And so you can see here that the axle is beginning to come out on this side. I'm probably going to be able to pull this axle. There you go. So I'm pulling the axle out. This is a pretty smooth operation. This is a finely machined piece here. So I'm going to pull this out a little bit further, and now it's gotten wiggly on me. The whole wheel has gotten wiggly. And the reason for that is because the axle's no longer in the other side. So here's the way the axle looks. You know, you've got this large piece here that covers this span here. So there's the axle. Now I want to remove the wheel, and we're going to pull it away from the calipers, hopefully pretty smoothly, and I want to be able to kind of have a hold of a fork or of something here so that I can feel if the weight of the bike suddenly shifts forward on me. The chair that's underneath the skid plate should be holding the bulk of the weight here, and so this shouldn't be a problem, but you know, well, things happen. So I'm going to kind of roll the wheel forward, and as I do that, it's going to start coming out of the calipers. And the weight actually seems just fine. The other piece I wanted to mention here is this piece here. This is the piece that I had mentioned that is a spacer, and you can see me wiggling this guy out, right? So there it is, and it can fall. It can get, you know, kind of wiggled out and be a pain in the butt. So keep an eye on that. Another thing to keep an eye on is don't put your greasy hands onto the rotors. In the right order, we did the caliper, and then we did the axle. And then once we do the axle, then we can roll the wheel out of the calipers and brake pads, and it's got clearance at that point to make it past everything, and ta-da, we have a front wheel off. So there is your disassembly.